Okay, guys, for those of you who didn't or weren't able to join the lesson today, I'm just going to introduce the assessment for the Revolutions unit. Your task in this assessment is you are going to create a timeline. Okay, within that timeline, you are going to look at the causes, the methods of protest, and the consequences of a revolution. That revolution can be any revolution of your choice, okay? But it has to be more than 10 years old to actually sort of count as being historical, okay? So your first task will be to try and work out what revolution or protest are you interested in covering, okay? And we'll talk a bit more about that today. Some ideas and possibilities that students have done before, okay? This one you might recognize. This is from the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. We have the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. We have the Iranian Revolution, okay? This is the protests of Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland in 1972. We have the anti-war protests that took place in America that were against the Vietnam War, okay, and over an extended period from 1967 to 1972. We have the Civil Rights Movement, and in particular, the Washington March that took place in 1963. We have the Cuban Revolution, okay? The dates there are pretty obvious for you to see. There's the Russian Revolution of 1917. You could do the women's rights movement, okay? In the UK, this was 1872 to 1928, so much more of an extended period. You could look at the women's rights movement, though, in America. You could look at the American Revolution. Okay, so we're going back even further in terms of history now. Okay, you can do any revolution that you choose, but we must run it past me to start with to make sure I'm happy for you to do it. If you are going to choose one of the ones that I've shown you and talked about already, you do not need to get any approval. Okay, so think about the sort of revolution that you might be interested in. That really is today's task, for you to start exploring and making sure that you are aware of what revolutions exist and which one you're going to find most interesting. Now, for the ones I've talked about, we've given you two sources to start some background reading. I don't necessarily need you to or think you're going to know right this minute in terms of what you're going to do. You might want to read around a couple protests first before you decide on which one that you're going to do for your assessment. So as I said, each one has two good sources that you could use to find a little bit more about these revolutions. Okay. Your task today is you are going to start to do some research around your chosen revolution or protest. In Google Classroom, and I'll just show you what it looks like. In Google Classroom, you will have a document that looks like this, okay? So each of you got one of these documents. This is where you are going to gather your evidence and information that you are going to use for this assessment. Now, what you can see up on the top here is an example of what you could write for one of the key events that took place. Okay, so if I've chosen to study, for example, the Russian Revolution, I would want to try and find 15 key events that took place either, as it says here, before the revolution took place, during the revolution, or after the revolution. Okay, because remember, we are looking at what are the causes, what are the methods of protest, and what are the consequences. Causes will come before the revolution. Methods of protest during, consequences after. Okay, so we need to understand the full picture of this revolution or protest. So you're going to then add 15 different points into this table. And this is going to be your main research task today. Try and put these in chronological order. You can obviously move things around as you go at a later date, but obviously having them in the chronological order to start with is going to be very helpful for you. Once you understand what you want to put in or what goes in this table, you're welcome to delete the top row here, which is linked to the the March on Washington. If we go back to the PowerPoint again, so you are trying to look at here and categorize what each of these events are. Are they a long-term cause? Now, a long-term cause would be something that would happen anything from several years up to maybe 6 months prior to the event taking place. A short-term cause is within the last year. Okay, so let's say long-term causes are anything that is a year or longer. Methods of protest, you know about different methods of protest. Some are violent, some are peaceful. Some use pitchforks, some use guns, some use hammers, you name it, okay? But we're looking at what methods did people use and what was the consequences of that revolution, okay? So in the event category column, we need to make sure that we can actually allocate one of these 4 areas to it, okay? In the evidence, you need to explain what the event is, what happened, why this is important, and how do you think it led to change. Now, in the evidence, I'm expecting to see things like dates, names of people, names of places, quotations, everything that we need to support your argument, okay? Try and find an associated image that will go with that event. And then make sure for now, you're keeping the URL of the web source that you are looking at. Now, you might find 5 or 6 different events in one web source. That's perfectly fine, okay? But during the course of this project, we want to make sure that we're using probably 4 or 5 different sources to support the evidence that we're gathering here. As I said, your timeline is going to have 15 key events on it, okay, that are going to link obviously to time, and they're going to have images linked to this, okay? You need to produce this as a hard copy, all right? So we're not just going to ask you to submit this via the laptop. We want you to do this and can create this. Now, it's fine to type out the text, cut it out, and then stick it onto your poster like the person has done on the right-hand side, but you're not creating the whole thing online. We'd like to get you away from your laptops for a bit. And we want you to be creative. Here are a few ideas of ways that people have been creative with their timelines, okay? You could hand draw and sketch certain elements, certain events that took place. You could create a board game out of your ideas. Think about really coming out of the box. Use materials that you can find. Your parents have been contacted by Miss McPhee in regards to this project, and are aware that you will need certain materials. So if you ask your parents, I'm sure they'll be open to getting certain materials for this assessment. As I said, they are aware of this project. Think about using different fonts when you're working with this to make it more interesting. Okay, think about how to use imagery. There is also a link down here that will take you to student work from previous years. If we have a quick look at this. You'll be able to scroll through some of the great ideas and the great work that sort of students have done in the past. Okay, and this is obviously the exhibition that we have at the end of each year, each of the time we do this. Again, we can see people have been very, very creative in terms of their timelines. We want you to think outside of the box for this. This one was a great one. This was a camera, and at the bottom of the camera, the timeline all rolled out, which was the film. Okay, really unique idea. Eileen, she created one that was a puzzle. Okay, so really try and think out of the box with this. Okay, so your task right now, bear with me. Okay, so your task today is to start exploring which revolution you want to do, and then start gathering evidence in your evidence sheet. Next lesson, we'll start talking a bit more about how you are going to assess some sources and the analytical writing part that will go with this.